Hi, my name is Richard Smith, and I'm the author of Such a Mind as This, Biblical Theological Study of Thinking in the Old Testament. And tonight we're going to apply that as a thinking, as a verb, literally with some old friends of mine, because we're called the Thinklings. And we like to think about themes and issues and questions in popular culture that appear in movies or articles, whatever the source, and then think about it and analyze it and critique it, respond to it from the biblical worldview. But let me introduce my buddies to you first. These are all guys I've known for more than 45 years. I won't tell you how old they are, but I'll tell you this, I'm the oldest one of all of them. Okay, on my upper left with the blue shirt is John. Now, John, well, we go a long way back, all these guys do, but John is an author, published author, teacher, and very active in his home church. Down in the bottom left is Keith Rowland with the pit shirt. Keith is a businessman, an elder in his church, and an avid reader. We have exchanged book suggestions over the years, a number of them. I'm sure you would agree, Keith. Yes. We read a lot of the same books together. He sends me always the good ones. And the other fellow right under me is Chuck. Oh, I wasn't going to say his last name, and I almost did. Chuck, he's been around for a while too, but he's the youngster of the bunch here. And Chuck is the director and the founder of a mission organization which is focused on theological education around the world. And he and I and John have done some projects together with that ministry. So the topic tonight is virtual reality. And we have all read an article that we're going to discuss with you tonight and discuss with each other. And the article is called Virtual Reality is Genuine Reality, unquote. So embrace it, says a philosopher. And I'd like to read the opening paragraph just to set the flavor, then we'll summarize the article and we'll begin to discuss it. The opening paragraph is this: it is hard to imagine humans spending their lives in virtual reality, when the experience amounts to waving your arms about in the middle of a lounge with a device the size of a house brick strapped to your face. But this is where humanity is heading, says the philosopher David Chalmers, who argues for embracing the fate. Advances in technology will deliver virtual worlds that rival and then surpass the physical realm. And with limitless convincing experiences on tap. The material world would lose its allure, he says. So, in order to fill out his argument with one of you guys or a couple of you guys, summarize other main points from this article about virtual reality and its allure for the future. And by the way, don't fight to have a turn, because audiences don't like silence. So just, jump in. Go ahead, John, you're smiling. Oh, Chuck looks inhaling, he's going to speak. Go ahead, one of you guys.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Well, I was just going to say that one of the premises that Chalmers makes is that as you read that the virtual reality becomes reality. Yes. And I always think about the Matrix and the ultimate extreme of that. But the writer of the article talks about a brick on our heads, and I mean, if you think about it, Elon Musk is already working on a project, where to insert nano threads in people's heads and feed information in there. So, this is reality. I mean, this is where we're going. And I took a look at the lead-in that Facebook, now Meta, has, where Zuckerberg is, popping around with his wife and friends and in this little virtual world. And I think this is the raw beginning. They believe that this is all about making a fortune, and this is the way the world's going. And they intend fully to create this virtual world and make it as real as it possibly can be for all of the rest of us. And so I think that's what Chalmers has already bought into and says, embrace this, with a few caveats, with a few little dangerous spots that he highlights, although nothing along the lines of where I think the pitfalls lie for us.
Yes, and of course that's where we're going to come to. And he mentioned the brick on the face. Do you remember the old portable phones that were this big and that fat, kind of a brick, and we couldn't imagine anything like a smartphone today? But I suppose that the technology is going to catch up. Do you guys remember some of the caveats that he was concerned about, or would you like to summarize some other aspect of the article that struck you?
Well,
John or Keith?
I'd like just to throw out, there's certain words that become part of a vocabulary, a growing vocabulary that we have to face. We kind of grew up thinking about the universe.
Right.
And now there's people talking about a metaverse.
Right.
This alternate verse, the metaverse, one that's created. And I looked up, it's easy to find it online, the introduction to his book, Reality Plus, in which they were talking about philosophers who want to say that reality is made up of thoughts.
Right.
It's one of the ways that forms. Or of course, scientists would talk about atoms. But the quote that I thought was about the metaverse is, the universe is made up of bits.
Yes.
Bits of information. So this is where this movement is from, away from physical reality, maybe even away from thought, to a computer framework out of which we'll suddenly understand reality. And I thought that that's kind of what they're saying. And there was a quote in there, it was funny: take the blue pill,
yes,
and see what happens.
Yes.
I mean, that's what they're saying to us: take the blue pill and see what happens.
What happens to it. That's a good point. Keith, you want to add something?
Yeah, I was struck by the paragraph, in the next century, perhaps these worlds would seem, emphasize, would seem as real as the physical world around us. So he's almost confessing it's not necessarily real. We think it would appear to be. In the paragraph before, he's talking about simulation. As we already, in baseball, we have simulation games. When players are going through therapy, they have what's called a simulation. They get ready to get back into the real game.
Right.
So we're trying to get as close to physical reality as possible. But I think because in our culture, we are so oriented to entertainment and to sensationalism, which has affected the church with premillennialism,
right?
Which that's why it's so attractive, because it's been Hollywoodized. Like when Tim LaHaye says, "I'm not going to see your funeral. I'm not going to have a funeral.
Right.
I'm going to see Jesus come. I'm not going to have a funeral." People by the millions believe that because they're looking for something that's entertaining, that's stimulating. And we're all affected by it. We all like to romanticize something. That's why Hollywood is so attractive. And why the Left Behind series was so attracting, because it brought, like, you're going to be just swept away and you're not going to die. Right. Or even have any suffering. But we get caught up into things that seem real. And it's interesting how people say, particularly in class, if someone is in an upper middle class or rich and they get into lower class environment, what are they told? Welcome to the real world. But what they are experiencing is real too. Right. But in our society, where we are sorting ourselves into like-mindedness, we're always around people who think the same way we do, and we become a pious ghetto, as I've used that expression decades ago. And it's easy to conform and think the reality is within our own little group. And sometimes it's hard to get it challenged. And we become vulnerable to bizarre things if we're around people that always think the same way we do. That was the danger of discipleship that we're all involved in, that we can get into a place where we all think alike and we're missing out on another reality that we don't even know about.
Do you think, two caveats? First of all, just this is a self-aggrandizing marketing tip. You guys have done what I hoped you would do, or anybody would do in your situation, I hoped, which was you've thought about this already. You've done some extra reading. In other words, it's wonderful. So I'm really impressed and admiring your thoughtfulness already. I'm learning a lot just listening to you. The thought I had listening to you, Keith, and the others is, isn't there a sense from the biblical point of view that virtual reality is as old as the garden?
Right.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
We have been creating virtual realities on low-tech means since the creation of the world.
Right.
The danger now is that we're going to have the technology to do it in a much more vivid and world-defying sort of way. But I'll leave that out there for you guys to flesh out. So we either can take up that topic if you want to run with that, or I have a couple of questions that might be useful.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. I'd like to respond to that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, this article was, is not written from a Christian worldview.
Right.
There's an assumption that, with virtual reality, man determines his destiny without answering or being accountable to anyone else, right? Especially not to God.
Right.
So, and that's secular humanism. We were talking about secular humanism back in the 70s, right? Before,
Right.
In its early inception, in the Humanist Manifesto. But man is the center of his universe. He can choose his own path. And the verse that came to my mind about this was Proverbs 14:12, because it tells us there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way to death.
Right.
And so this in virtual reality, and we'll talk about some of the good things, because there are some good applications, because in essence, technology is neither good nor bad. It just, it's neutral. We can use it for good purposes. We can use it for bad. But, Chalmers states that most of the factors that make life meaningful are going to be there in the virtual worlds. And he says, there's no good reason to think that life in VR will be meaningless or valueless. And my response to that is, picking up on what you just said was, where is God in this world? And I think VR is created to some extent to escape God and his world, right? I think of, John Lennon's Imagine, right?
Yes.
And isn't it wonderful if there's no God out there? Well, that's what we're doing. I saw a precursor to this. My daughter-in-law has a younger brother, and some years back he just dropped out, into game playing on doing computer games, and all of his friends, if you will, had these weird meme bodies, right?
Yes.
And you don't even really know what they look like. You don't, in reality, you don't really know what they sound like, because they use all of these different voices and they express their opinions. And they're living virtually, through each other in this game format. So, that this is the precursor for where we go, except it goes, obviously VR goes much more deeply than that. But morals are whatever we choose them to be in this new reality, right?
Right. Do you think this is something I think comes from the article. Based on what you just said, Chuck, it strikes me as highly irrational. Virtual reality is genuine reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
can I speak to that?
Please do.
Okay, so I always like to look up words. What do words mean, right?
Yeah.
I mean, virtual reality.
Right.
Well, the word virtual means almost or nearly as described, but not completely so.
Right.
So we're calling it reality. Well, reality is another loaded word, right? All of these words are loaded.
Yes.
Reality, the world as it actually exists, or the quality or state of having existence.
Right.
And they mean different things and they have different ways. So to say it's a virtual reality, we started off with this. It's not quite reality.
Right.
But it's going to be assumed as reality because it'll take that second definition of reality, the quality or state of having existence. I'll have existence in this alternate reality, but it's not actually reality.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, you start to really think about these words, they kind of lock us in to going back to the garden problem.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you started it off by saying, Such a Mind as This, your book, which some of us are blessed to be reading right now. And it just
you're nice.
reminds
I
me.
didn't, by the way, viewers, I didn't pay for that advertisement.
No.
But I
no.
probably will afterwards. All right, go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, Satan offered them an alternate reality.
Right.
Almost. It was aspects of it honed in on reality, but it wasn't the real thing. Right. And this article echoes to me of these scary dangers of yet another substitute for reality, for friendship, for relationships, for community, a substitute. We thought Facebook was weird when someone said, I have 600 friends.
Right.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, wait till they have 600 virtual reality community members in which they're a part of, living, walking, talking, having meals without eating. I mean, breaking bread electronically.
Yes.
Thinking they have community. So I don't know, I kept coming back to the garden. I have to admit it, Richard, I have to say it. It just kept drawing me back to where the problem began. Sorry for going on long, but it cranked me up.
Oh, well, that's the idea. Nature. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Richard, I think you're right on. It's nothing new. What else is new? Think of drugs. Yeah. Hallucination, this has been around for centuries.
Yeah.
Different biological plants that people discovered that gave them this high, they use that word high, this splendid feeling of a reality. As we know, drugs that are mind altering, that we grew up with in the 60s and 70s that we knew about, that people had these fantastic experiences. It was all virtual. It seemed, getting back to those words, it seemed very real.
Right.
But I think it shows the emptiness in the human heart for reality, but going to the wrong place for it. Because we're in a materialistic culture, we are addicted to our senses. And we assume that all reality is in the physical world. But we know that there's a hunger for something more. And unfortunately, it's going to the wrong place, whether it's drugs or even this. And realizing that the human heart is longing for the spiritual, for the truth, that the gospel and the kingdom of God offers.
Yes.
And sadly, it's rejected for these other alternative realities.
Yes. Yeah.
The low-tech ones with drugs that's been around for centuries.
Yeah. 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 I want to go back briefly to the statement, because it really strikes me when he says virtual reality is genuine reality. Aside from the fact that it's nonsensical, to say something about what is real and what is not presumes that he has, in effect, a transcendent perspective. He's looking down on all the various relativities out there, all the different views of reality, and pronouncing them all equal in stature. That is a very, how should we put it, godlike posture to assume. other thought that any of you had, random thought, before I go on to another question?
Well, I want to comment what John said. It was really hit me, John. Facebook. I think one of the great under the radar diseases in our country, psychological, spiritual disease, is loneliness. That's why people get on Facebook and say, I got 600 friends, as John said, but there's a longing for relationships. And I think our lives are a testimony, 45 years of it. To me, you can bring the gospel down to relationships, loving God and your neighbor. And it's all about the ministry of reconciliation, having a relationship with God and extending that to relationships with real people. And we're seeing the disease of loneliness in our culture, not just in the United States, throughout the world for that matter.
Yep.
And that there's a longing in the human heart for relationships.
Yep.
Good point.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that, Keith, because I'm sure you guys saw this in your own churches, but going through COVID, we've had all kinds of John and I have talked about this, all of the tension that has built up among Christians in their own within the same church, right? And among churches and how they've handled COVID. But there are folks who are very afraid, and they have quote attended worship remotely, right? Virtually, if you will. And those who believe that no, it doesn't matter, whether I'm sick or not, we need to be fellowshipping right with the people of God. The point is not, I mean, I don't mean to get us sidetracked on that, but the point I'm trying to make is that it's the church is created because we were lonely. Eve was created because Adam was lonely, and God filled that gap. And I agree. I think this idea of virtual reality, and people can engage with fake people or people who are being something other than what they really are, which they can project to be maybe someone that they've always wanted to be, but it's not who they really are. And they escape through these sinful projections, in my opinion, and run away from whom God has called us to be, which is to be, to love who we are because God made us in his image, and therefore to relate in a position of weakness and acceptance the other folks who desperately need that relationship, and we relate. You can't do that in virtual reality. You can only do that on a personal level, face to face.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the way God made us.
Yeah. John, you want to say something? Looks like you do.
I'm trying to think when to say it. What's interesting
about
this.
Now's your chance.
This very conversation is in a form of virtual reality.
Yes. Are we hypocrites?
You are below the equator, Richard. We're above the equator.
Below the belt. I know, I'm really down there.
Yeah. But there are some cautionary things. There value to certain kinds of virtual experiences. And I was just going to say, virtual reality is not genuine reality. Virtual reality is a genuine experience. We're having a genuine experience using a tool, but it's not reality. We're not confused to think that we are in South America. We know what the limits of this virtual experience is. So anyway, I just
that's
keeps coming
good.
back, because here we are talking over Zoom.
Right.
We can't knock it too much.
Right. Well, that brings me to a question. But see, I know I'm in South America because I have the air conditioning on, and you guys have the heat on. See, and I'm in shorts. You can't see.
But it was 60 degrees today, Richard. So
don't tell us.
We're living large, guys. Hey, I'm in the deep South.
Well,
yeah.
Well, there's hope for you. Listen, since you brought it up, John, that was one of my questions. Let's tackle that now, and then I have two other follow-up questions. And so this question has to do with what you already alluded to. What are some of the good benefits of virtual reality, of the kind in which the author is describing, where you actually wear, a headset and you live all kinds of experience? When is that? How is that positive? What are some positive uses of it? It's open to anybody.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot, Richard.
Go ahead.
I was thinking there's tons of applications, right, that you can use virtual reality for. I spent over 20 years in the Navy Reserve, right, somewhat active duty, but I mean, just the first thing that came to my mind was just military applications, right?
Yes.
Infantry combat experiences and training and what it's like. And if you're in a virtual reality, I mean, the military is already beginning to do this kind of stuff. It's not advanced like what we're talking about moving to, or what Chalmers is advocating,
sure.
or Meta. But we're getting there, right? And so being able to train, and you can train a whole lot faster when you are in the middle of this experience, right? And you're experiencing this kind of stuff as the trainer has set up a scenario, and you're a part of that. We went through, and in the Navy we went through shipboard damage control, right? So they had these, fake ships, and we're inside, and they're flooding these things, and oh my goodness, we're going to drown if we don't, seal this thing because we've been torpedoed. Or you go into the firehouse, and they turn the furnace up, and you're in a fire. You're in a real fire, right? So it's shipboard firefighting or aviation firefighting, all critical things. But think about doing these kinds of things and learning how to do this process in a virtual reality mode. It's tremendous. Any kind of I would think training in the trades, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Everything.
It's. I mean, right now, I'm horrible at. I'm not a mechanical guy. I'm just very unmechanical. But I learned how to put in my garbage disposal by watching a Home Depot YouTube video over and over and over again. So that's not virtual reality, but I'm seeing this guy do it, and it's hinting at that. But I was just thinking about, think about things from an historical standpoint, from an education standpoint, right? I love military history, and that's what my advanced degree was in. And so I think about what would it have been like to be at D-Day, hitting the beach at Normandy. You're in the middle of this. You're experiencing this. What would it be like to be with Nelson on his flagship at the Battle of Trafalgar, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what would it be like to be in the Jerusalem room with the Westminster divines as they're duking it out, and the Westminster Confession of Faith, or with Saul as Goliath is shaking his fist, and uttering insults to the armies of the living God, or you can go on and on. What would it have been like? What would it be like to cross the Red Sea with Moses and the children of Israel? And you could go on and on with that kind of thing. But those are areas where I think would be just remarkable. If you use those from an educational standpoint in all of those areas. Where I think those are applications that are warrantable and worthwhile and very useful from a VR context.
Sure. I mean, I can imagine doctors doing virtual surgeries.
There you go.
Or dentists doing virtual dentist things. Anything else on that topic?
On the positive side?
On the positive side, yes.
Okay, well, on the positive side, I guess there's, we could just keep running with it, right?
Yes.
We could come sit with you in your office. That would be pretty cool one day.
Kind of boring.
No, but we would be in your office, and you would service that crazy
Oh,
drink you
Bekarovka.
have,
Yes.
and we would somehow think we're tasting it. You
Yes.
know,
I like that. I like that. 38%. I like it.
It's nice. That's right. You'll like it.
Yeah.
Well, let's flip the coin, and let's talk about, do you think that the author, Chalmers, particularly the philosopher, has really discerned the dangers of this technology well, or is he minimizing them, or is he lacking discernment, shall we say? And I'm not talking about spiritual dangers. I'm talking about sociological, psychological, social pitfalls of this technology run amok, not to mention the profit motive and all that's going to do, what it's going to do to human relationships. So let me throw that out, and then just to get you thinking about it, the last question, I think, will be stepping back. If each one of you, each one of us, can offer a sort of a biblical critique or biblical junction, where by the kind of philosophy of virtual reality that he's advocating is going to butt up against certain biblical truths. And then each one of us can contribute to that pie or that stew and see how it tastes when we're done. Okay, so now we're talking about the question: has he underestimated, and if so, how?
I'll throw out a comment, a short one that he made.
Okay.
He says one of the potentials are neglect on a global scale.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, okay, that's honest, right? Neglect on a global scale. You've already described, Chuck, about, was it your cousin, or I forget who was in the
Was my daughter-in-law's younger brother.
Okay, so he might experience neglect on a personal scale, right? You could see how neglect became.
Yeah.
But once everybody's doing it, I think that's an honest assessment. There can be neglect on a global scale. So I'm going to give him credits for at least seeing that much of it.
But it's
You may not
horrible to think
understand
about.
other things, but
Right.
neglect on a global scale. Right.
Right. Good point. Thank you. Keith,
I think I kind of echoed John. I was getting ready to say the same thing, but in a few words later, physical reality is really important. We got to keep a grounding in it and treat it well. So I do give him credit for seeing the danger. So,
yeah, I don't think he comes close to understanding the dangers, though. Keith, you mentioned earlier, about drug usage, and think about how addicting this will be,
right?
Right? I mean, if you have people in virtual reality, nothing ever happens, nothing bad ever happens to them, right? They're never frustrated. Right. Their wives never get on their cases. Their kids never bug them. They don't have responsibilities. They, I've added, I don't know, a six-pack where I never dreamed I could have one, right? I looked better. I got fancier clothes. I got a better looking house. And he mentioned a couple of these things, in the article. All of a sudden, this danger that I don't want to come back from that. Mm-hmm. Why would I want to come back from that? If everything's great, everything's wonderful. I'm not living reality. It as John said, it's definitely not reality. And then, how do I survive when I come back, when I re-enter, right. the reality? How do I face my responsibilities in the reality that, I'm the same person that I was, before, right. And I don't look, yeah. I'm still the ugly guy, and I'm still the skinny, scrawny guy, and I'm, and I still got the same problems at home and everywhere else, right? And I work at the same boring job with the same demented boss and all of that stuff. And so, I think he touched on these areas, as John said, but when you drill in, it's like, danger, worse. Will Robinson, danger. I mean, we're headed down a path that it may be the point of no return. It's going to be very difficult to if we do what Meta wants us to do, and I believe this is in their business plan. I think he wants the whole world to be dependent upon these virtual worlds that he creates.
Yeah.
And it's actually worse than this, because you will pay, Chuck,
Right.
for that 6-pack.
That's right.
Right.
You will pay for that house, because I play golf on my computer. One of my pastimes, to play golf. And they're always offering me new club for $2.99.
Mhm.
They're offering me this and that. And there's things you can get for free if you're not willing to shell out the dough. It's been going on for a long time in the games.
Yeah.
You pay for the better stuff. So while you're getting that 6-pack that you don't have, you pay for it for the house. When you come back to your house, you just spent a boatload of money in a world that doesn't give you anything back.
That's right.
And he does mention this. This is the scary part of the return and investment mentality of the companies that create these worlds for us.
Yes. And I'm sorry, John. I was thinking about an analogy. If you guys remember the first Matrix movie, and how alluring and powerful addiction is self-deception, and how difficult it was for Neo to escape the virtual reality he was immersed in, even while something inside him told him something was wrong.
Right.
Or take the example of the old movie, if you remember, Truman Show.
Oh yeah, that was good.
Truman had a sense something wasn't fitting together, and what a struggle to escape the self-deception or the deception that was foisted upon him. Okay, so unless one of you have one more thought to add, then we'll go to our last question.
I wanted to. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Chuck.
I wanted to add an anecdote. I remember reading an article years ago about Carlos Santana, and he was stating why he never took drugs was because this is in the 60s, of course, in San Francisco, and so several of his bandmates had been experimenting with LSD, and they just told him how wonderful, it enhanced their musical abilities, and it was just the most amazing music they ever played. And then he listened to them play, and he realized it was all a lie. They had lied to themselves, and this drug made them think that they were playing at an ability and at a spiritual level, if you will, and connecting with their music and their instrument in ways that was quite the opposite, right? And he said it was horrible. And it showed him that, well, he wasn't going to take drugs. And I think that's what virtual reality will do for us, right?
Yeah.
It'll suck us in. It will fool us into thinking that this is all such a wonderful place, but it will turn out exactly what John said in the garden, where the serpent, when he deceived Eve, and Eve gave Adam to eat, and did they become wise? Well, they did, but the end was death, and they would have gotten what they wanted had they trusted God for it in the first place. But that's where I think we're going with this VR stuff.
That's interesting.
One
Keith?
thing I'd like to throw on, which we can't talk about tonight, Richard, but it's one for the future. And this guy, he's a philosopher, and he's also involved in neuroscience.
Yes.
And we didn't even get into the real problem. One of the problems of alternate reality is it affects how you think.
Yes. Yes.
See, our brain has a problem sorting out things. And once we change how we think, we already know. All of us who try to live a godly life know how experiences change. And when they affect the way you think, they affect your behaviors, they affect your choices.
Yeah.
So we can't go down that path tonight, but boy, I tell you, neuroscience tells us a lot about how the brain really works, not the way we think it works.
Right.
And that's part of the big problem. God made us to work how it really works. And we're constantly trying to think that it can work some other way.
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought that up. It's part of the puzzle. Keith, you wanted to add something?
Well, I was just going to say how we think, as Chuck was saying about the musicians that thought it was making their musical skills, enhancing it, and it really wasn't, and how it affects religion, how it affects the church. I'm always somehow amazed at these Pharisees who had committed their lives to scholarship and knowing God's word, committed their lives to it, but missed it completely when Jesus came, because they thought they had it right. And when Jesus warned his disciples, I believe it's in John's Gospel, chapter 16, you will be thrown into the synagogues to be persecuted by them, thinking they are doing God a service.
Right.
And it's amazing how the mind can get so deceived. And it was a kind of a virtual reality, thinking they knew what God's purposes were. And we see it throughout the history of the church, people killing others, thinking they were doing God a service. And it's still a puzzle to me how the mind can be so vulnerable to deception.
Yeah, right. Good point. Good point.
Yeah.
Well, we're running up against our limit, so let's just finish with this last question and try to be short with it, because I think each of us could go on for an hour. Offer some biblical perspective, or if you want to call it theological perspective. Where does the kind of virtual reality use we've been describing butt up against some basic truth or truths, or illustrate certain basic truths that we learn in the Bible? And let's finish up with that. So whoever feels like they've got their thought ready, go first.
I think what I was trying to say at the very beginning of this conversation, Richard, which is that we're looking at this as retreating from God. That's the way I see it. We're trying to create a world where there is no God, where we are not responsible or accountable to anyone or anything.
Right.
And we are our own gods. So we create God, in whatever idol that or image that we build. So there might be some semblance of God other than us, or we are God, right? Man is God, and we are all our own gods, and we've created God in our own image, and it is not his image. It's once again what mankind has gone through since the garden, and that is that we try to make ourselves God, and that's I think that's really where the rubber hits the road. And that's, it's just one more thing, but it is a big thing. And it has the capability to affect the entire world with this level of temptation, to become our own gods in a myriad of ways in this new venue, if you will.
Okay, good. Keith or John?
I would say it gets, the garden thing is right on. And it came back when Satan offered Jesus the world. He says, you can have all of this. And notice Jesus didn't question his authority over it. But he didn't want to be a God. He came to serve, even though he was God in the flesh, but he came to give himself as a sacrifice for us, and the whole atonement theology, which we don't want to get into, but he came to give himself, and he rejected to be the ruler of the world according to Satan's ways.
Right.
And he humbled himself even to the death on the cross. I'm reminded of that song in the 80s we were talking about the other day, Rich. I think it was the Talking Heads. Is that right? Talking Heads?
No, it wasn't the Talking Heads. I looked it up. It's another group, but I can't remember the name.
Remember back in the 80s? And
Yes.
Remember that song? Everybody wants to rule the world. Getting back to what everybody wants to be God. Everybody wants to rule the world. And that's what Satan was offering Jesus. And he said, not so. You shall worship God alone. And from there, it was the road to the cross.
Good for you. Yes, very good. Thank you. John?
Well, I was just thinking back to the title of the article. I mean, Chuck and Keith have said some things. I don't need to repeat it. Virtual reality is a genuine reality, so embrace it,
Right.
says the philosopher. Well, I think that we can't embrace it. We got to be wary of it. Man is not inherently good. The world is not going to get better because of what people create. For is all the good that we could imagine, the evil of it will come out shining brightly. All the horror and evil that will come out of this technology is equally imaginable, even though we shouldn't. So embrace it? I don't think so. We'll just have to be careful, watch it, like an animal, like a lion. We're gonna have to be wary of it, but it will be there. It will be there, right? It is there already. So,
well,
rocket's taken off.
Yes, the train's left the station, whatever metaphor you like. I would just finish with building on what Chuck said. He basically stole everything I was thinking, so I won't repeat the way he said it, which was good. That's okay. I'll bill you later. What I was thinking is the verse in Romans 1:18 through 23, where he says in verse 18, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against the unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And then it goes on later, and exchange that truth for the lie. And that is a direct allusion to Jeremiah 2:11 through 13, if I'm not incorrect, where God says to Israel, has any religion, any nation ever changed their gods? But my nation have changed me and have chosen broken cisterns that can't hold water. So the spiritual diagnosis is not extremely positive for what we were discussing tonight, although as we noted, there are positive uses as there is in any technology. I'm sure they thought the same thing about the wheel when they first invented it, and many of the other things that we presume today. But anyway, it's time for us to draw this to a close, and just let me say that you guys have surpassed my hopes and dreams for this pilot session. It's been fascinating and exciting for me to think together with you, to try to think God's thoughts after him about a subject that's, as you say, it's here, and it's only going to get heavier and thicker. So I'll just bid you guys good night and say God bless you, and look forward to the next time we can meet and talk together.
Amen.
all right.
Thanks for the opportunity, Richard. Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you, Richard.
Bless you.